subscribe to Life Stories so you don't miss new stories. The time was approaching autumn, and our courtyard pool began to clog more frequently with slowly falling leaves from trees and other small debris brought by gusts of wind. Previously, for its cleaning, I would invite a neighbor's young man who skillfully handled the task and received a fee for his pocket expenses from me. However, this year he had grown up, finished school, and left for college. Therefore, I decided to look for a company that could send a relatively decent person to work for us. I had known Stewie practically all my life, watching him grow up. Moreover, he was good friends with my son, who is only a year older, and when we weren't at home, I could even trust this neighborly lad with the keys to the house. Dr. Yao. However, I had to leave all the equipment outside by the pool so that the new person could start working immediately or coordinate a time when either my wife or I would be at home. Meanwhile, when I had already chosen a company and was about to call them, just returning home from work, my wife called and said that an unpleasant incident had occurred at her workplace. She immediately added that overall she was fine. She just stumbled on a ladder step and broke her leg. I rushed to the hospital where she had been taken, and when I arrived, Cindy was already lying in bed, her leg wrapped in a thick plaster cast. Rejets. Lord, Cindy, how did this happen? Why didn't you call me earlier? I asked excitedly. Well, you always ask me not to bother you with trivial matters. Besides, you said you had an important meeting today. Are you out of your mind? Is this trivial? I interrupted her. Her speech seemed absurd to me, as if she was just trying to tease me that I was really serious about my work. Oh, come on. Aquipricities, nobody died. But now I can take a break. She immediately tried to lighten the mood. Then she started asking about the plans for the upcoming pool cleaning, and I told her everything I had already decided. Cindy stayed in the hospital for several days until the doctor allowed her to return home. At that time, I decided to postpone the pool matter for a while, as my main concern was my wife's condition. And when I finally brought her home, she suggested that she could now take care of it herself since she wouldn't be able to go to work anyway, and I agreed to her proposal. A couple of weeks went well. The yard became noticeably cleaner, and I also noticed that our garden had transformed a bit. When I asked Cindy about it, she explained the company had sent a very diligent and skillful person. Apparently, she had a conversation with him and found out about his other talents. So she decided to let him take care of our entire yard. I was pleased that my wife had managed the time she'd had to stick around the house so competently. Besides, I was able to get a few consecutive days off myself. Myself and I decided to spend them productively. Cindy was feeling much better, and her friend, who lived a couple of houses away, often visited her. Bell Wars. I wasn't worried that something might be needed in my absence. I called my longtime friend, who had long invited me to stay at his country house near a small lake. Are you sure you'll manage? I asked my wife again before leaving. Everything will be fine. Go. You don't give yourself a break anyway. Believe me, I have someone to take care of me. My wife replied with a smile, almost pushing me out of the house. Her friend Rose stood nearby, giggling cheerfully, nodding in agreement. It's around 30 years old, with a sturdy build and a wavy tail on his head. He was in work clothes, but I still had the thought of going back inside and asking my wife who he was. Well, I suspected he might be the worker sent to clean our yard, just I hadn't encountered him before since I spent whole days at work. And as soon as I turned around, Rose was right there, immediately taking it upon herself to clarify that this person named Edward was indeed the previously mentioned worker. Moreover, she demonstratively started flirting with him, as if sensing a spark of jealousy in me. I glanced at them and headed towards the exit, where my friend Ray was waiting for me in his car. Is this your gardener? He asked me when I got into the car. He does a bit of everything. My wife seemed satisfied with his work, I replied, and Ray chuckled mockingly at my answer. What's up? He asked. Does he really work as a gardener? Looks more like a stripper, Ray replied, then realized he had let slip words that would now sow doubts in me. Perhaps I should have canceled the trip with my friend and stayed home to check for sure, but Ray started talking about the lake again and how long we had been planning to go there, persuading me not to change my mind. I agreed with him, especially since in the almost 20 years that Cindy and I had spent together, I hadn't noticed her paying special attention to other men. Ray and I headed out for 2 days, just the two of us, to relax from the world and chat over beer and fishing rods. I tried to maintain a cheerful mood, but for some reason, I couldn't fully concentrate on relaxation. That guy I met in the yard kept coming back to my mind, and sometimes I wanted to instantly be back home to make sure that my fears and suspicions were just overthinking. After a few hours, I left my friend on the shore and walked further away in search of a better spot, as the mobile network wasn't great there. I called Cindy. At first, I just asked how she was doing, but then I honestly told her about my observation that Rose seemed a bit interested in our worker. Cindy just laughed in response and then said that Rose had indeed decided to have a little affair with him, especially since she had recently had a falling out with her. And falling out with her admirer, my wife's response calmed me a bit. I wanted to believe her. I always considered trust to be one of the important aspects of married life. I returned to Ray, and he was already smirking in my direction. "Just worried about your wife?" He asked as if he guessed that I had called her. "Don't worry. Will she dare to cheat on you? Besides, as much as I've known both of you, your relationship is like something out of a book. Unlike mine, where it's a quarrel almost every day over some trivial thing. Your Claire just has a grumpy personality." I commented. "You're right," he replied after a pause. "But sometimes I envy you in a good way. I wish my Claire had the same character as your Cindy." The rest of the weekend went relatively smoothly. I tried not to think about Ray's failed joke and pushed away negative thoughts. Chmuscat at work? I had a lot of mental tasks, and now my brain really needed a break. Simply observing the ripples in the water and the occasional jerk of the float, signaling that a fish had taken the bait, truly calmed me down and allowed me to forget about everything. Returning home, I already felt well rested. Spending a few hours in nature had a more significant effect than if I had been sitting on the couch in front of the TV or with a book in my hands. The only thing on my mind now was how my wife was feeling. She greeted me quite cordially, sitting on the sofa and knitting something with her needles. But when I entered, she immediately put aside her occupation and reached for her crutch. "Don't get up, darling. How are you here? Everything is fine, as Rose just left recently. She helped me prepare lunch and put some order in the house. And you catch anything?" she inquired. "Yes, mostly small fish. Sorry, but I didn't bring home the trifle. I gave everything to the street cats near our house," I said, sitting next to her, realizing that I had already missed her. The smell of chlorine and some cleaning agent emanated from my wife, as if she had spilled it all over herself. Cindy immediately explained that this was almost the case when she decided to clean the kitchen on her own. But then her friend came to help her. By the way, Edward decided not to work for us anymore. Too bad. He was such a good worker, Cindy said, when I had changed, and we settled in the kitchen and I decided to serve the food myself so that my wife wouldn't burden herself. "Really? Why?" "He liked how he worked." I asked my wife. "Yes, but Rose said something to him and they had a quarrel. But then he just came up to me and said he wouldn't be working here anymore. It seems strange to me. After all, she doesn't even live here." I also found it strange that the worker left for no apparent reason, but I didn't dwell on it. On the contrary, it somehow reassured me. After all, those recent jealous thoughts that tormented me, I could now just forget like a silly dream. Later, I wanted to resume the search for some workers, but my wife said she would handle it herself since she still had plenty of free time and didn't want to get bored. Our life returned to its usual course, and I immersed myself in work again. The next day, I returned from work a bit earlier and noticed that there was an older lady taking charge in our kitchen. I immediately addressed this question to my wife, who was already hurrying to meet me. She explained that Mrs. Carey was just helping her for a few hours a day since she had fallen out with Rose, who no longer came to assist. It seemed a bit strange to me, given that they had been close friends for many years. However, life takes unexpected turns, and I didn't press my wife for details. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carey appeared before us, quietly as a ghost, and informed us that she's done today. "By the way, your friend is a very polite young man. He helped me carry the bag, although it wasn't heavy at all," the old lady said as she bid me farewell. When I escorted her to the exit, my wife immediately confessed that Ray had visited us and asked to borrow some tools. I was surprised why he hadn't called me or visited later, knowing well when I usually returned home. However, I didn't want to scold my wife. She already had enough to deal with, managing everything even with a broken leg. After a brief conversation with her, I headed to my office and called my friend to ask what he needed. Ray immediately started apologizing for coming to our house so abruptly without informing me, but explained that he urgently needed to fix something in his car, which had broken down not far from our house. He thought of using my tools because he lacked what he needed. He promised to bring everything back the next day, as he was currently busy and couldn't free up time. I wasn't angry with my friend. It just bothered me a bit that both he and my wife had hidden his visit from me and hadn't informed me, even though my wife told me about it in the evening. I still felt like I was being ignored. The next day, as promised, Ray brought back my tools and apologized again for the awkward situation. I invited him to sit with me for a while and chat, which he readily agreed to. Meanwhile, Cindy grabbed the bag to take everything back to the shed. I noticed it and scolded her a bit for not trying to take care of herself, and she had to abandon her plan. Later, after saying goodbye to my friend, I decided to return the tools to their place immediately so that my wife wouldn't attempt to go there on crutches again. As soon as I entered, I felt a strange odor in the shed, as if something had died. At first, I thought that it might be an opossum that had snuck into the barn and eaten the poison bait I had placed in certain spots. So I decided to immediately check where the dead carcass was lying around to put in the trash, wandering around the shed and checking every corner. I found no opossum or any other creature. However, the smell of decay couldn't have appeared out of nowhere, and I even started sniffing to locate where it was stronger. Soon, I realized that the stench was coming from the pungent odor became even stronger as I descended the stairs into the cellar, the entrance to which was inside the shed. I hadn't checked there for a while, and concluded that I would have to spend the next weekend cleaning that space. However, before that, I needed to remove the dead animal and air at the area. I discovered that the light bulb was not working, so I used the flashlight on my phone to illuminate the way. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became. In the farthest corner, I noticed a large bundle, something wrapped in a piece of cloth, and that was what emitted the powerful stench. Approaching it, I unwrapped the fabric and was shocked by what I saw. There lay the lifeless body of a man, the same one I had seen in our yard before my trip with my friend. Immediately, a strong wave of nausea hit me, and I rushed towards the exit, barely managing to escape the cellar. I vomited everything I had eaten for dinner onto the floor, just regaining my composure a bit. I realized that my wife and perhaps her friend were involved in this. No, I understood why Cindy didn't want me to go to the shed. In any case, I needed to report this to the police, but before calling them, I decided to first find out from my wife what really happened. Cindy immediately guessed about my discovery, seeing my expression as I returned to the house. She turned pale instantly and tried to feign illness. However, her manipulations didn't affect me, and I immediately began a harsh interrogation, stating that if she didn't confess everything, I would simply call the police, and they wouldn't treat her gently. My wife became even paler, and for some reason, it seemed much scarier than I had imagined. She started by saying that it all happened accidentally. She just didn't know what to do, and she was afraid I wouldn't understand her. Moreover, she really didn't want to end up behind bars. As she spoke, my first thought was that she had indeed had a love affair with Edward, as he was quite handsome. However, the further my wife continued her story, the more I realized that it was much more complicated. Cindy was almost in tears as she recounted her version of events. She explained that Edward had recently been acting as if he had lost his mind and started harassing her. Despite her rejections, he was persistent and took advantage of her illness to corner her somewhere. Rose, who genuinely liked Edward, noticed this behavior. She immediately quarreled with everyone and just ran out of the house. Edward, thinking that now nobody would interfere with his plans, once again went after Cindy. However, at that moment, there was a knock on the door. Cindy immediately began screaming for help, and a minute later, A burst into the house. Debate ensued between Edward and Ray. Edward even managed to grab a knife and slightly wound Ray's arm. Nevertheless, Ray was able to overpower him when he seized Cindy's crutch and thrust it into the assailant's eye. It was then that I remembered. That evening, I remembered seeing Ray's bandaged hand, but he told me it was just a minor injury while fixing his car. He even expressed his desire to return the tools to their place, but I dissuaded him. We were so scared at that time. We didn't know what to do, Cindy continued. We both understood that arrest was inevitable, so Ray suggested hiding him in our shed for a while, and in a few days, he planned to get rid of the body. I listened to my wife, but something still didn't add up in her story. So, I began questioning when exactly everything happened. It seemed too little time had passed to accomplish all that. Then I recalled that on the very first day of our vacation, Ray went back to town, supposedly running out of bait for fishing and needing more beer. But Swain, on the other hand, I felt extremely drowsy that evening and lay down to rest while waiting for his return. But even if he did go to town, what did he need at our house? So, I pressed Cindy to tell me everything until the end. However, Cindy claimed that she didn't know why he came to us, but was grateful that he showed up at the right time. Otherwise, she couldn't imagine what Edward might have done to her. Then she started blaming me, saying I should be thankful to Ray for saving my wife. I realized that my wife wouldn't back down from her version of events. So, I decided to go to Rose to question her, hoping she wouldn't hide anything from me. However, I didn't tell my wife where I was going. Still, she sensed it and clung to me, begging me to stay and help her. I pulled my hand away, and Cindy, losing balance, fell to the floor. Soon I was at Rose's house. She didn't open the door immediately and wasn't very willing to talk to me. Nevertheless, I insisted, stating that it was important and related to Edward. Rose finally let me into her house and told me something that shocked me even more. You saw that I liked Edward. Yes, we were developing some kind of relationship. He may not have been rich, but you saw what a handsome guy he was. So, Cindy probably envied my happiness or whatever's going on in her empty head. She decided to take it away from me. Yes, I caught them shamelessly having sex on the couch. Your wife is so stupid, she didn't even think to lock the door. What? This can't be. I was just perplexed by these ugly words, realizing that Rose had no reason to lie. You can't believe she didn't lock the door. Sometimes it happens. Now, but she told me about Edward and Cindy. She couldn't do that to me. But she did. Believe me, I wanted to tell you. But I thought you wouldn't believe me anyway. And I see I was right. But I don't care. Figure it out yourselves. Besides, I reconciled with my Sam, and everything is fine with us now. I left Rose's house in complete confusion and disappointment. I immediately headed home, knowing that a major scandal awaited us. Now I planned to talk to her differently. I was even ready to hit her if necessary. While I was against hitting women, if it involved cheating, such women just deserved a good slap. While I entered the house with even more anger than before, Cindy decided to attack right away, bombarding me with questions about where I had been, as she had fallen and hurt herself, and there was no one to help her. Rusty bitch. I yelled. You want help? So this what's-his-name Edward didn't help you enough. Was told me everything. How could you? I even took a swing at her, and I could see that she was getting paler and paler with every word I said. Cindy burst into tears like a child caught in a mischievous act. At that moment, I was convinced that Rose didn't lie to me, although I had intended to slap my wife. I still lowered my hand, giving her a chance to say something in her defense. However, for some reason, my wife believed she could still convince me that she wasn't guilty of what had happened. She kept insisting that Rose must have imagined everything and that she had nothing with Edward. Then I had to press her harder, grabbing her by the delicate neck, pressing her against the couch, and raising my hand again. But Cindy seemed willing to endure any torture just to remain blameless in my eyes. Actually, I got tired of this pointless squabbling, so I let her go, leaving her to continue crying, and called the police to report that I had found a dead body in the barn. When Cindy heard my conversation with the police operator, barely had I finished, she immediately started yelling at me that I had made a big mistake. After all, when the police arrived, they would end up arresting my friend as well, who had just protected her from the violence of a hired deranged laborer. I hadn't thought about that, but it was too late to change anything. I even regretted that Ray would have to answer for everything. I even wanted to call him and warn him that the police would likely come to him. But what would I tell him for that? Besides, I still didn't understand how he ended up in our house that evening, and I still didn't know what really happened then. I left it to the police. At that moment, all I understood was that Cindy was lying to me, and so was Ray. He didn't mention anything about coming to my house and seeing Edward harassing my wife. So he was somehow involved in this story. Or maybe he was just afraid that he killed someone and now hoped to cover all the tracks. Either way, I believed that the police would find out all the details, and then I would know exactly whom to blame and whom to apologize to. The police didn't keep me waiting, and soon various specialists were in my yard, dealing with the body and inspecting the shed. Some of them also meticulously examined my house. They turned everything upside down, not even sparing a piece of trash. Meanwhile, one investigator began questioning me and my wife. I told him everything I had learned myself and added that all the information I provided was based on the accounts of others. So I didn't know how my story could help them. Next, he proceeded to question Cindy, and this time she panicked, saying and screaming that she was not guilty of anything, and I was just a jealous husband who might have killed Edward himself. I was shocked by what she told the police, but now I understood that she was just accusing everyone around her to avoid being among the inmates. They even took Cindy's crutch as the presumed murder weapon, and 2 police officers had to escort her until they gave her some old cane. When Ray entered the cell and saw me, he immediately transformed and angrily attacked me, expressing that I was actually to blame for everything. We even had a little scuffle, and then the police officers calmed us down with weak electric shockers. Ray, just tell me how it really happened. I addressed him when we had cooled down a bit. You understand that my lawyer will pull me out of here right away because I'm not guilty of anything, and you were at my house that evening. I just want to know what really happened because everyone around me is lying. You won't forgive either me or your wife anyway, but I'm not guilty of Edward's murder either. Ray, just shut up. Cindy intervened again, paling even more. But now I had a hunch that the whole truth was about to be revealed, so I asked Ray to continue. Yes, I'm guilty of coming to your house that evening, but I just wanted to meet with Cindy. As you can see, we had a romantic relationship. I'm sorry, friend, but that's how it is. We just liked each other and didn't tell you to spare your feelings. And that evening, I came to see her again, hoping to spend some quiet time with her, but she was with that handsome guy. I caught them, so to speak. Ray's words now wounded me deeply, and I wanted to attack him again for being my wife's lover. However, I realized that if I did it right away, he wouldn't tell me everything, so I patiently waited for him to finish. A fight broke out between me and Edward. Yes, I was jealous of your wife being with that handsome guy, and I wanted to beat him up. When we fought, he fell on his back, and at that moment, Cindy grabbed her crutch and swung it. I'm not sure whom she intended to hit, but she got Edward right in the eye. He writhed a bit on the floor, clutching his last seconds of life, but then quickly died. Ray, how dare you? Cindy intervened in our conversation again. John, don't believe him. It's all not true. He killed. Shut up. I yelled at her. You've already caused enough trouble. Then I turned back to Ray. Well, anyway, we were both scared. Believe me, I knew they'd try to pin it on me since your wife is temporarily crippled, so I figured I could get rid of the body soon. But I couldn't take it away right away because it would stain my car. So I hoped to think of something. So I temporarily hid the body in your shed. If you hadn't called the police, no one would have known. Didn't find out. I learned more that night than I have learned in the last year of my life. You and Cindy. God, how long has it been? But Ray remained silent. How long? He asked. I asked again, only louder now. For like few months. She was just lonely. She told me, since you spent so much time at work. And then I finally couldn't stand it any longer and attacked him with my fist again. But this time the cops didn't separate us. They were standing around, listening to our conversation, and maybe just gave me a chance to vent all my negativity on the enemy. But Ray didn't fight back. I guess he realized he made a mistake when he made love to my wife. When I felt that I had beaten him enough, and I looked at his bloody face, I thought that no matter who killed Edward, he would be punished behind bars. At that moment, when we had just finished fighting, the sheriff came into the office, and seeing this picture in the cell, he immediately began to reprimand his subordinates for not doing anything. And they were back in our cell, and now they're taking us to different cells. I didn't have to sit there for long. Soon my lawyer arrived and was able to negotiate with the sheriff to have me released, and they had no evidence against me, except a hunch that I might have committed the crime out of jealousy. But I was away from home at the time, and the lawyer successfully proved it. The next morning, when I was already home, I took the day off, saying I was a little sick. But what I really wanted to do was to call the realtor, because the house now disgusted me, and I wanted to get rid of it. And just as I finished talking on the phone, there was a knock at the house. I opened the door and I saw a sweet old lady standing in front of me. It was Mrs. Carey coming to work for us again for a while. She obviously didn't know what had happened here. I told her we didn't need her services anymore, but I invited her in to have a cup of tea after the journey. When we were already sitting on the couch, I decided to ask her what she had noticed while she'd been here, especially about Ray. It's nothing like that. He was so nice to me and to Cindy that at first I thought he was her husband. but she explained it to me later, and the only thing she asked me to do was not to touch anything in the barn. But my grandson, Edward, used to work here. You must know him. He disappeared suddenly. Did he say anything to you about where he was going? Oh, Mrs. Carey. Nothing. I couldn't tell the old lady that her grandson was no longer alive. Let the police handle it. I walked her out. I waited a few days while the investigation was going on, and finally, when the court hearing was over, both my wife and Ray got the same sentence because there was blood on the crutch, even though Cindy had cleaned it with all kinds of products. But it also had Cindy's and Ray's fingerprints on it. I don't know why he was holding it, although he just said that he served it to my wife. And on top of everything else, they kept talking about each other, saying who the killer really was. But I didn't care about that anymore. I could see that their so-called love for each other had sharply diminished, and my love for Cindy had waned as well. I had discovered that she had not only cheated on me with Ray, but had also been tempted to have sex with another man. I was completely disappointed in my friend. In another situation, I might have tried to help him, but now I felt that he deserved to be punished as much as my wife. Bistro and the bar, as well as cleaning the kitchen and cool rooms. Jake would occasionally offer to help but would always leave after 20 minutes, claiming he had to make a sale. Jill often worked late into the night because this venture was her dream. During my spare time, I would take furniture home to restore, returning it once it was in good condition. The business finally opened after 6 months, thanks in part to my dad's assistance, and it launched under budget. Jill managed the business and oversaw the kitchen while I worked wherever I was needed, whether in the kitchen, at the bar, or tending to maintenance. I was on a salary, held the position of second in command, and could work in any role as required. Things were going smoothly for a year. Our business profitable. My dad enjoyed his weekly beer and steak. Karen appeared content, and Jake continued working as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical company. One day, I fell ill at work and decided to clock off early and head home. And pulling into my driveway, aside from a sinking feeling in my stomach. Everything seemed normal. Jake's car was parked there, but that was to be expected since he lived with us, so I didn't think anything was amiss. As usual, I parked my car behind Jake's. This detail becomes important later. When I opened the door, I was greeted with the shocking sight of Karen and Jake engaging in an intimate act on the couch. Jake hastily grabbed his pants and made a quick escape through the back door upon seeing me. Karen and I had a heated argument that lasted late into the night. She tried to shift the blame onto me, suggesting that I was never home and spent too much time with Jill, even though our relationship was strictly professional. I eventually went to bed and suggested that she could sleep in Jake's bed, as it seemed more comfortable for her. I also called Jill to inform her of the situation, as Jake was her boyfriend. Jill was understandably upset about Jake's infidelity, but admitted that she had suspected he might be seeing someone else. She kindly offered me a room at the motel until I figured out my next steps. The following day, Jake's car was still parked there because I had blocked it earlier. I told Karen that she could keep the rental and the furniture. I informed her that I would return for my tools in a few hours and requested that she not be present that afternoon. When I returned home to load my tools into my truck, I stumbled upon an unfamiliar bag beneath my workbench. Upon closer inspection, I discovered a significant quantity of small tablets. The way they were packaged and hidden led me to suspect they were likely party pills. A thorough search of the house revealed 2 more bags and approximately $12,000 in cash. It all added up, and I realized that Jake's supposed pharmaceutical sales job was actually a front for his pill-selling activities. It occurred to me that Jake might have given these pills to Karen for their intimate moments. I was furious at first, but then I realized I had everything I needed for payback. Jake's car was still parked in the same spot. I entered the house, took his spare keys, and put on some gloves I found in the garage. I stashed half of the money and 1 bag of pills in his car trunk. I removed his spare tire from the wheel well and concealed the bag there. The other 2 bags I discreetly disposed of down the storm drain in the alley behind my house. As for the $6,000 cash, well, Jake cost me a house full of furniture, just saying. I sent a message to both Jake and Karen, following the typical script for someone who's hurt. I can't believe you did this. We were friends, blah blah blah. I've left. I hope you two are happy together. I then made an anonymous tip to the local police and all left UTF, describing a man matching Jake's description loading what appeared to be narcotics into a car that matched Jake's vehicle. I also provided a partial license plate number that matched his car. It didn't take long for law enforcement to locate the car and discover the pills. What I didn't anticipate was that Karen was driving the car at the time. She was later released when they realized she was driving the wrong car at the wrong time. However, a warrant was issued for Jake's arrest. As a bonus, I later found out that not only were the police after Jake, but his supplier was as well, since he had lost a substantial amount of product. Fast forward 3 months. I bought a house, still worked with Jill. Karen was expecting Jake's child, and he was on the run. I suspected she was staying in touch with Jake because she suddenly left the area when she was 8 months pregnant. 12 months after the incident, during a night of drinking. Jill and I mixed business with pleasure and started dating. That was a decade ago. We are now married, have 2 kids, and just opened our 3rd business. Dad still enjoys his weekly steak and beer. I heard a rumor that Jake and Karen ended up in Alaska, but I can't confirm it. I do feel a bit remorseful about it now because Jake inadvertently made it possible for me to be with Jill and live a wonderful life. I genuinely hope they're doing well. Story 3. My ex-partner and I first met in high school, had our only daughter after college, and tied the knot a year later. Initially, everything was wonderful, but over time, our relationship grew stagnant. We faced a dead bedroom situation and coped with the typical challenges of a long-term marriage. Unfortunately, I made a selfish choice that set everything ablaze. I began an affair with a man from my gym. It all started with harmless flirting, which eventually led to him giving me his number. From there, it escalated to sexting, secret meetings, and eventually a physical relationship. Things took a turn for the worse. I would invite him over when my husband was working late or claim I was at work while spending time at his place. Fix about a year into the affair, my daughter graduated from college and moved back home. I can't recall exactly how she found out, but she confronted me. Speaks about the possibility of me cheating on her father. At first, I tried to lie, but my deception was failing. In the end, I concocted a false tale about my unhappiness, which wasn't entirely true, and explained that I loved both her father and my affair partner, and this was my way of finding happiness while allowing her father to be happy too. Surprisingly, my sob story worked, and she agreed to keep it a secret. Her only stipulation was that I couldn't bring him to our home, so I continued to meet with him at his place. One day, while I was asleep, my ex-partner went through my phone and discovered everything, all my conversations and pictures with my former affair partner. Blinked. He also stumbled upon the conversation where I mentioned that my daughter was aware of the secret. This led him to read the text with my daughter where she expressed her desire for my happiness. Boom. In the following week, I noticed a change in his behavior. He barely engaged with my daughter and me, responding with monotonous yes-nos or I don't cares. This situation deeply affected my daughter as they had always been close, and she began to worry that he had found out about the affair. Then, one day while my daughter and I were watching TV, he arrived home, placed some papers in front of me, and calmly stated that he wanted a divorce. He revealed that he was aware of my affair, and even mentioned the name of my former affair partner. That. I asked our daughter to leave the room, but he insisted that she should stay, reminding us that she wanted me to be happy. My daughter and I were both devastated and begged him for forgiveness. He yelled that he wanted a divorce and urged me to sign the papers quickly so he could exit our lives, as he believed I obviously didn't love him, and that he obviously wasn't a good enough father for our daughter to be involved in such a situation. Then he left. The divorce process lasted around 9 months. I repeatedly pleaded with him to consider reconciliation, or at the very least to forgive our daughter. However, he remained steadfast in his decision to have no involvement with us. Since then, neither my daughter nor I have had any contact with or seen him. She has attempted to reach out through texts and calls, but he consistently ignores her. Our relationship has also suffered greatly during this time. She went through a severe bout of depression, and we've had some explosive arguments. She has expressed regret over covering for me, saying she should have informed her dad as soon as she found out. She's used harsh words, calling me every name in the book and deeming me the worst mother ever, believing that I've ruined her life. I ended up with the house as it had belonged to my parents previously. She moved out to live with her friends and only communicates with me when she needs something, visiting solely for quick item retrievals. I've shattered everything, and now I have no one. It's been 3 years, and I deeply miss my ex. But there are 2 significant obstacles. He despises me, and he's remarried with an adopted baby, making reconciliation highly unlikely. And to the best of my knowledge, he still doesn't communicate with our daughter. Is there anything I can say to him to facilitate contact with her? Is there any way to mend my fractured relationship with my daughter, or is everything irreparably damaged? I'm utterly lost.